Framed by James Ponti. Chapter 22. Extra Credit Algebra. I couldn't believe that Serena Miller and Earl Jackson could possibly be involved in the theft of Woman with a Parasol. Or maybe I just didn't want to believe it. Miller was a family friend, and Jackson was so nice and unassuming he insisted I call him by his first name. But I also couldn't ignore the fact that both were at Art Fest in Budapest at the same time as Pavel Novak. It could just be a coincidence, offered Margaret. Remember when you were first teaching me about toast? You warned me that just because something is unexpected doesn't mean it's suspicious. Yes, but it's the closest we've come to connecting Novak with anyone at the museum, I said. Even worse, they were both directly involved with updating the security software. You couldn't pick anyone in a better position to orchestrate the whole burglary. I sat down in my chair and slumped. I haven't met either one of them, so I don't know what they're like, she said, but there were 3 other people from the museum at that convention. What about them? These were the names and titles listed on the itinerary. Michael Jennings, PhD curator. Kendra May, conservator. Ryan Thigpen, project manager. Serena Miller, director of security. Earl Jackson, security manager. We know it's not Jennings because he moved to New York over a year ago to work at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I said. What about the other 2? Margaret asked. If Kendra May is a conservator, then she probably works with your mom. You're right, I said. Let's find out. We headed upstairs and found Mom in the front yard painting a picture of the house. It's a tradition she's done of every home we've lived in. Wow, Margaret said, admiring it. That's beautiful, Mrs. B. Mom smiled. Thanks. It may not be nice enough for the National Gallery, but we should be able to find a spot for it somewhere in the house. Don't let her modesty fool you, I said. She's sold paintings in some really nice galleries. And don't let sales fool you, she responded. Van Gogh only sold 2 paintings in his entire life. We could talk for hours about the difference between what's true art and what sells. But I don't think that's why you came up here. You look like you have a question. 2, actually, I said. Do you know a project manager named Ryan Thigpen? She thought about it for a moment. The name's familiar, but I don't know him. I think he oversees a modern art installations in the East Building. What about Kendra May? Of course, said Mom. Kendra's extremely talented. She specializes in the Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists, like I do. She did an amazing job repairing a Degas that had been damaged in storage. So if her specialty is the Impressionists, then she'd be a fan of Monet, right? Reasoned Margaret. Who isn't a fan of Monet? Answered Mom, but sure. In fact, I think she did some academic research about him for her PhD. So far, so good. What's she like as a person? I asked. Is she nice? Mom laughed. A little as she considered this. She's not mean, but she's also not too friendly. She likes to do her own thing, and she really gets upset if anyone moves her lunch in the break room refrigerator. Margaret and I shared a look. I already liked her much more as a candidate than Serena and Earl. Why do you ask? Mom wanted to know. It's part of what I'm looking into for Agent Rivers, I said. It turns out she was at a convention in Hungary at the same time as the man who painted the forgery of Woman with a Parasol. And you think she might be involved? Asked Mom. I shrugged. Maybe? Well, then I have bad news, she said. Kendra had a baby a few days before the burglary, a boy named Vincent. Suddenly, Kendra May seemed much less likely to be the one we were looking for. I can't imagine anyone planning a major museum heist to coincide with giving birth. It would just make everything too unpredictable. Margaret and I grabbed some apples from the kitchen and headed back to the basement. Here's what I'm thinking, Margaret said as we got back to work. You're not going to meet someone and instantly hatch a plan to rob the National Gallery. You'd want to meet at least another time or 2. That's true, I said. So let's go back to all the records and see who went back to Europe. This time we didn't consider only convention and trade show trips. We looked at all travel involving any of our potential candidates. Here's one for Ryan Thigpen, said Margaret. Stockholm, Sweden in January of this year. That sounds unbearably cold, I replied. Anything for Kendra May? No, she said. I'm thinking that and the baby give her a pretty good alibi. I was scanning through the papers when I came across a trip to Berlin by Earl Jackson. 4 days meeting with consultants, I said, reading off the description on the trip. Oh no, said Margaret. What is it? 2 trips by Serena Miller, she said, looking up at me. One last September and one just a few weeks before we saw Novak in the museum. Where to? I asked. The first one to Paris and the second Prague. Toast is about the accumulation of many little details, and for the moment at least, those details weren't looking too good for Serena. I was bummed, so Margaret reminded me that we had an entirely different lead to follow. You never know how it all might shake out, she said. Let's see if the auctions show us anything interesting. Because his insurance company worked with all the prestigious auction houses, Oliver Hobbs had been able to access complete bidding records for major auctions involving the big names of Impressionism. Normally, the public only finds out who winds up with the painting, but this gave us a much bigger picture of who was interested in the paintings the burglar targeted. We hoped we could find a mastermind hidden among the bidders. Each auction is printed on a separate piece of paper, I said to Margaret, so let's line them up in chronological order. Just like we'd done with the names of the conventions, we taped the results of each auction on the wall. This way we could walk along the evidence and look at the big picture instead of only bit by bit on a computer screen. I want to put pictures of the paintings up too, said Margaret. That'll help me keep track of them in my brain. Good idea, I said. Margaret got the images off the web and printed thumbnail copies of each. There, she said as she taped the last one up. It's like Gallery 85 has come to the underground. At first it was hard to look past anything but the massive amounts of money paid out at the auctions. One of Monet's water lily paintings sold for $47 million to a private collector, while a museum paid $32 million for a portrait by Renoir. We're talking mad crazy money, said Margaret, and we think one of these people may be the mastermind? Not one of the winners, I said. Someone who can pay $47 million for a painting doesn't need to steal one. We're looking for one of the losers, someone who keeps trying to get one but gets outbid. So if you can't beat 'em, cheat 'em, she said. You got it. Basically, there were 4 different types of bidders. Institutions, such as museums looking to add paintings to their collections, monetary funds and banks buying them as financial investments, private collectors, and what were called anonymous entities. Why be an anonymous entity? Asked Margaret. A lot of reasons, I guess. Maybe you don't want anyone to know how much money you have. Maybe you don't want the art world to know which artist you're interested in. Or maybe you're a criminal who wants to keep his identity hidden, she said. Yeah, I agreed, maybe that. We decided to focus on the anonymous bids. In order to stay anonymous, you have to hire a representative to do the actual bidding and communicating with the auction house, I explained to Margaret. So what you do is give your representative a limit, say $5 million, and the representative stays in the bidding until the price goes over the limit. That's why so many of these end up on nice round numbers, she said, pointing at one of the bid sheets. This bidder stopped at $10 million, and this one stopped at $15 million. Those must have been the limits their clients gave them. Exactly, I said. So why did this one stop at $12,457,493? She asked, pointing at a bid for a Monet. I looked at it for a moment and said, I have no idea. She looked at an auction 6 months later. Here's the same representative, American Art and Antique Acquisitions, trying to get another painting, also a Monet. The final bid is $12,629,127. Those are such random numbers, I said, completely baffled. We looked through all the auctions and found 9 instances when American Art and Antique Acquisitions tried to purchase a painting. Each time the painting was either a Monet or a Renoir, and each time the bidding stopped at a seemingly random number. We wrote the bids on a separate sheet of paper and hung it on the wall, too. Then we just sat there and stared at it, and stared and stared, as if the answer might jump out at us. Margaret Margaret said, rubbing her temples. It's like I'm doing extra credit algebra homework. Maybe that's it. I said, maybe it's algebra. What type of algebra? I got on the computer to search for something. Here it is. Write this down. Amount to equals amount from times rate from over rate to. She looked up and was giving me a total stink eye. I speak English, not equations, she said. Why don't you just copy down what you see on the screen and then explain what the heck you're talking about? Exchange rates. I dealt with them all the time when I lived in Europe. We'd have to figure out how many dollars are in a euro. Or if we went to London, we'd have to convert euros into pounds. Maybe these actually are nice round numbers, I said, pointing at the list, just not in dollars. I tried doing the math on paper until Margaret reminded me that the computer would be quicker. I started entering numbers into the equations, and then I compared those amounts with currency rates from the days of each auction. It wasn't complicated, but when I was done, it couldn't have been more basic. Each number equaled the exact same amount. 50 million leu, I said. 50 million what? She asked, confused. Leu. It's a type of money. Oh, she said. Which country uses the leu? That's when I grinned. Romania. James Ponti's Framed. Chapter 23. An actor named John Wilkes Booth. Once Nicolae Nervescu entered the story, preserving my covert status became more essential. I wasn't allowed to call or text Agent Rivers, and I certainly couldn't just show up at the Hoover building and ask to see him. If I wanted to make contact, he told me I needed to do so by way of a website made especially for people like me. You mean secret agents? I asked, charged with excitement. No, I mean middle schoolers, he answered, bringing me back to earth. The FBI Kids page is a site for students who want to learn about the Bureau. It has video clips, interactive games, animations, and a link called Ask an Agent. I clicked the link and signed in as 12-year-old Johann Blankfort of Bethesda, Maryland. My question, how can you meet an agent in person? Soon I received a standard response that told me about community outreach programs, such as the demonstrations put on by the FBI's Canine Explosives Detective Team where agents were available to the public. Then the next morning, while Margaret and I were walking to school, I got a text from a phone number I didn't recognize. It read, "Tell Johann to visit our American cousin after school today." That was it. I waited for another text that might, explain what that one meant, but none came. "Who's that from?" Margaret asked. "Agent Rivers." "What's he have to say?" "I have absolutely no idea." She read the text and asked, "Who's Johann?" "I am. Johann Blankfort is my secret identity with the Bureau." "Get out!" She stopped in her tracks and turned to face me. "You have an actual government-issued secret identity?" "I've even got fake IDs," I said, fighting back an ear-to-ear grin. "Sorry, that's my puppy." "That might be the coolest thing I've ever heard," she replied. "But if you're Johann, then who's your American cousin?" I spent most of the day trying to figure that out. I must have reread the text 100 times, including once during life science, which cost me 3 class participation points. But it wasn't until lunch that I paid attention to the fact that the words "our American cousin" were all capitalized. "You think that's important?" Margaret asked when I pointed it out to her. "People are kind of random when it comes to punctuation in text." "Agent Rivers isn't random about anything," I countered. "If it's capitalized, it must be the title of something." I Googled Our American Cousin and found that it was the name of the play Abraham Lincoln was watching the night he was assassinated. Now I knew what I was supposed to do. After school, I got on the metro and took the red line to Gallery Place. I'm guessing the instant I used my Smart Trip card, a message alerted Agent Rivers I was on my way. From the subway station, it was just a short walk to Ford's Theater. On April 14, 1865, Abraham Lincoln went to Ford's to watch a performance of Our American Cousin. During the play's third act, he was shot by John Wilkes Booth. Now it is a historic site run by the National Park Service. It also happened to be right around the corner from the FBI headquarters. I got my ticket and blended in with all the tourists walking through the exhibits that detailed the events leading up to the president's death. I was looking at the actual Derringer pistol Booth used to kill him when the man standing next to me asked a question. How long did it take you to figure out where we were meeting? I glanced up and saw that it was Ancient Rivers. Most of the day, I said, and I got in trouble for looking at my phone during class. Sorry about that, he said, but I knew you'd solve it. If anyone happened to notice us, we just looked like tourists on vacation. He'd swapped his normal suit and tie for a Nationals t-shirt and a pair of jeans. For the most part, we didn't even look at each other. We just kept our eyes on the exhibits and talked quietly. So what'd you find out? He asked. A lot, I replied. Last year, Pavel Novak and 5 staff members from the National Gallery were at the same trade show in Budapest. Anyone we know on that trip? He asked. Earl Jackson and Serena Miller. I could see his reflection in the exhibit glass, and his reaction was as surprised as mine had been. Really? Earl and Serena? It gets worse. Miller took 2 more trips to Europe, including one to Prague 2 weeks before Novak entered the country. That's interesting. I keep thinking back to when Earl's name came up at the dinner party. She was so adamant that he couldn't be involved. I thought it was because she trusted him. But maybe she was just worried that if we pursued him, it would lead to her as well. What about the auctions? More good news, I said. It turns out an anonymous bidder has tried and failed to acquire a major impressionist work at 9 different auctions. He's put up a lot of money and is no doubt frustrated that he keeps losing. If the bidder's anonymous, how does it help us? Asked Rivers. Well, we know that the money is coming from Romania, I said, and also that the bids were placed by a company here in Washington. So it could be Nevrescu laundering the money for his father? I nodded. I looked him up some more, I said. He really likes to get involved in cultural events, especially ones in the Romanian American community. Right. So in 2 weeks, there's an open house at the Romanian embassy. They're calling it a Festival of Food and Family. He's one of the sponsors of the event. He'll be there. Maybe, said Rivers, but we sure won't. Why not? I asked. It's a chance to interact with him in public, a chance to see who he's meeting with. We already have him under surveillance a lot of the time, he reminded me, so we know most of the people he meets with. But more important, we're not allowed to go inside an embassy. You're the FBI. You can go anywhere you want. In America, he said. But as soon as you set foot onto embassy grounds, by law, you are in that country. If I tried to investigate someone while they were in that building, it would be seen as a violation of their sovereignty. Before you know it, the State Department's involved and there's an international incident. Oh, I said, slightly embarrassed. I didn't realize the legal part of it. That's okay. You're the kid and I'm the FBI agent. I'm the one who's supposed to know that, he told me. But you've done an amazing job, Florian. You've given us a lot to build on. I love doing it. I told him, what can I work on next? He looked at me, sighed, and put his hand on my shoulder. Past experience told me I wasn't going to like what he was going to say next. Nothing, he answered. You can't do anything involving the woman with the parasol case. I don't even want you working on it at home. I was devastated. But you just said I'd done an amazing job. You have, he said, but we can't risk your safety. The more likely it is that Nevrescu is involved, the more likely it is that you're in danger. Why? Just because we were both at the same soccer game? Sorry, Florian, but that's more than enough for me. But it was just a coincidence, I argued. There were tons of people there. Besides, if he wanted to do anything to me, don't you think he would have just done it then, when he had the chance? Rather than answer, Rivers turned toward the enlarged picture on display in front of us. This photograph was taken of Abraham Lincoln's second inauguration, he said, 6 weeks before he was killed. The photo was of a massive crowd on the steps of the Capitol building. In the middle of them all, you could see Abraham Lincoln standing behind a podium reading his speech. Lincoln's in the middle, but do you know who this is? He pointed to a man in the crowd of people looking down on the president from behind. No, who is it? He's an actor named John Wilkes Booth, he said. There were tons of people there, and besides, if he wanted to hurt the president, don't you think he would have done it when he had a chance? I stood there silently and considered what he was saying. You tell me, said Rivers. You think him being there was a coincidence? Chapter 24. Let's play toast. When Agent Rivers said I was off the case, he meant it. As soon as I started to leave Ford's Theater, it was as if we'd never met. I turned back to say goodbye, but he'd already disappeared through some unseen exit. As the days passed, I had no idea if the leads I'd given him helped, or if the case had taken a dramatic turn, or maybe even it hit a dead end. I constantly checked news sites to see if there was any breaking stories about Romanian mobsters being arrested, and every day I'd waited anxiously for my mother to get home from work, just in case she might have heard a rumor, or maybe seen federal agents sealing off Serena Miller's office. My only connection to the investigation was in the underground, where I still had my own case board on the wall. I tinkered with it all the time, straightening the cards, reorganizing them, hoping I might stumble onto some perfect alignment that revealed the mastermind. I was trying out a color coding system for the cards when I heard someone hustling down the stairs to the basement. Seconds later, Margaret burst into the room in full Margaret mode. I just had a genius idea. What is it? I asked expectantly. Does it have to do with woman with a parasol? Finding your birth parents? Did you figure out how to find one of the long-lost firefighters? No, and no. It has to do with you. Okay, I said, my enthusiasm slightly dampened. After all, I'm far less interesting than all those things. Still, I was happy that something was about to break the boredom. What's your idea? You're running for student council. I waited to see if there was any more to this brainstorm, but I could tell by her expression and the awkward silence that she had put it all out there. What student council? I asked warily. What do you mean, what student council? I think the question's pretty self-explanatory, I said. Have you been living under a rock or something? She asked. No, but I have been living in Europe for the last 8 years, I reminded her. I don't think they have student council there. At least not at the schools where I went. Now that's too bad, because it's really cool. There are 2 representatives from each homeroom, and they get to help plan the school dances and organize fundraisers, and at the end of the year, they take a trip to King's Dominion. We're talking epic roller coasters. Dances, fundraisers, roller coasters, I said, listing 3 things I considered far more terrifying than the Romanian mafia, although for the record, I had yet to confess any of these fears to Margaret. So what do you think? She asked expectantly. I don't know. I tried to fake a little enthusiasm, but the best I could do was, maybe? Why maybe? It'll be a great way to make new friends, and it's a lot of fun. Really? Because it doesn't sound like a lot of fun. It sounds like a lot of work. She plopped into a chair, and all the oomph seemed to drain from her body. I don't know how to break this to you, Florian, but in the world of 12-year-olds, that stuff is fun. I know you got to be part of something huge, and I think there are going to be times when you get to do that again. I mean, you're a consulting detective with the FBI. That's amazing. But it's also a part-time job. You can't just sit around rearranging the cards on your case board waiting for a mysterious text. She smiled up at the case board for a moment and smiled. Although, I see what you're doing with the color coding, and I think it might be game-changing. It works, doesn't it? I said, glad that she saw it too. It helps your eye pull everything together. Even so, she replied, getting back on the subject, you have to embrace the fact that you're a 7th grader. Middle school has to be enough because that's your full-time job. That's your life. So, you can either run for student council tomorrow, or I can have your mom come down here and start giving you pep talks about how 7th grade will be 7th heaven and why you need to be your true self. You'd never do that to me, I said. She gave me a sly smile and said, I think you know me well enough to know that's exactly what I'd do. Fine, I said in full surrender. Anything but that. So you're telling me you'll run? Yes, I answered reluctantly, trying to convince myself at the same time. If you say it's great, then it must be great. The next day, Jennifer Damon and I were elected to be the student council representatives from Mr. White's homeroom. 3 other girls ran, and I think I squeaked in because they split the popular girl vote, thereby leaving the Geeky Boys Superhero Fan Club constituency all for me. Slowly but surely, I was taking baby steps into accepting my middle schoolness. When I woke up Saturday morning, it had been 12 days since I'd left Ford's Theater. 12 days with no connection to the mystery. 12 days for my mind to reboot, just like they rebooted the security system at the National Gallery. That's when I had my revelation. Maybe I needed those 12 days off because when I finally saw it, it seemed as clear as day, and I marched right across the street to Margaret's house to tell her all about it. "We have betrayed our core beliefs," I exclaimed when she answered the door. "I have just had an epic realization." I blustered into her house, only to stop when I saw myself in the hallway mirror. "This is what it's like to be you, isn't it?" I said. "This is what it's like to burst into a room halfway through a conversation that the other person didn't even know had started." She looked at me and shook her head in total confusion. "I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about." "Ha!" I said, pointing at her. "And that's what it's like to be me. I never know either. You get used to it." "How have we betrayed our core beliefs?" "By ignoring toast," I told her. "What is it? Give me your best definition." "Okay," she said, getting into the spirit of it. "The theory of all small things ignores the seemingly obvious to consider only small details so that when they're added together, they reveal an undeniable truth." I stopped and smiled. That's a really good way to put it." "Thanks. I may have practiced it in my head a couple of thousand times, because I'm me." "Unfortunately, that's not what we've been doing," I said. "We haven't been ignoring the obvious to focus on the details. We've only been looking for the details that make the big things more likely to seem true." "I think you may have lost me for that last part," she said. "I know, I'm not expressing it nearly as well as you, but I think we've been looking at this all wrong. I think we need to go back to playing toast again. That's how we got as far as we did." She looked at me as she considered this before finally saying, "Okay, where do you want to play?" I did not hesitate with my answer. "The Romanian embassy." "You can't be serious," she said. "Agent Rivers specifically said that you couldn't go there. It's against the law." "No," I corrected. "He said that the FBI couldn't investigate there. And when it comes to this case, I no longer have anything to do with the FBI. I am a civilian. The Romanian embassy is holding an open house to share its culture with the people of Washington. That's us." "Really?" she asked. "This is what you want to do?" "When will we ever get a chance to look at Nevrescu using toast?" I said. "This is our one shot. He'll be there schmoozing and mingling, and we'll be able to see him in action. And we're the only ones who can do it. The FBI can't go in. Only we can find these clues. Only we can ignore the version of him that's in the papers and look for the little details that will tell us the truth." "And what if he recognizes you?" "He won't," I said confidently. "It was just a coincidence that we both were at the soccer game. Why do I have a feeling that if I don't agree, you're going to go without me?" "Because you're smart, and that's exactly what I'm going to do." "Okay, then I'll do it," she said. "Just let me get my sneakers, in case we end up having to run out of there." A few minutes later, we were on our way. I used cash to ride the metro because I'd purposely left my Smart Trip card home. I didn't want any alarms to let Agent Rivers know what I was doing. We got off at the DuPont Circle station and walked up Massachusetts Avenue for about half a mile. "There it is," I said, pointing across the street as we neared the embassy. The building was 3 stories tall and had a massive antenna on the roof. The front doors were open and the sound of music could be heard from inside. "Once we set foot on the driveway, we're no longer in America," I reminded her as we crossed the street. "So let's make sure we don't do anything stupid." "Good tip," she said. "I don't suppose you memorized any of those Romanian phrases?" "Just one." "Let me guess," she replied. "My hovercraft is full of monkeys." "Yeah, that's the one." We walked along the circular driveway until we reached the front door, where a bear-like man with a huge smile and a booming voice greeted us. "Beniate venit." I smiled back at him and said, "Mulțumesc." What just happened there? Margaret asked once we stepped inside the entryway where there was a grand staircase. He said welcome, and I said thank you, I explained. I thought you didn't speak Romanian, she said. I don't, I answered, but I can fake a little here and there. Like I said, it's similar to Italian. The festival was limited to the bottom floor, and while most of the rooms were open to the public, they were very specific about not going into any rooms with closed doors. In one room, a violinist performed traditional folk music, while in another, a stereo pulsated with Romanian dance pop. And everywhere we went, there was food. You have to try these cabbage rolls, Margaret told me in between bites. Delicious. Do you see any sign of Nevrescu? I asked. No, she said, but I can take a look over there by that table full of fried dough and sweet cheese. A pattern quickly emerged as we went from room to room. Wherever we'd go, I'd look for Nevrescu, and Margaret would look for food. Her search had a much better success rate than mine until we reached the library. The room was beautiful, with antique furniture and dark wood bookcases that went from floor to ceiling. It was packed with people, and I spied Nevrescu in the opposite corner doing the meet and greet with everyone. There he is, I said, nodding toward him. Excellent, mumbled Margaret as she finished swallowing a dessert known as papanache. And with excellent, I'm referring to both the fact that you found Nevrescu and this dessert. OMG, it's delicious. Nick the Knife's social swirl seemed to stay in that particular area, so I found a spot where we were somewhat shielded from his view by a large cabinet. If he had no idea who you are, then why are you hiding? She asked. I didn't really have an answer for that one, so all I did was smile. That's what I thought, she said. Then I pulled out a pair of glasses and put them on. What are those? Asked Margaret. Glasses, I answered, as if it were being obvious. Yes, but you don't wear glasses, she said, so I repeat. What are those? Okay, maybe they're spy glasses with a built-in camera that Agent Rivers gave me at Quantico. She shook her head and let out a sigh of resignation. I can tell this is going to turn out really well. All we're doing is playing toast, I reminded her. The glasses are so we can go back to the instant replay if we need to. All systems are go. Seeing Nevrescu in action completely changed my perception of him. Despite the intense death stare that was on display in all the photos we came across, in person he seemed charming, even from a distance. For example, when he'd meet someone, he'd meet sure to shake with one hand and clasp them on the arm with the other. It was friendly and warm, and definitely not what I expected. We watched him for about 15 minutes, making sure he never caught sight of us. The plan worked really well, until I saw someone totally unexpected. There was a swinging door that led to the kitchen, and when it opened, and I got a quick glimpse of a man loading a trash can, the door swung shut again before I could be certain. But he seemed to be wearing the same blue coveralls as the custodians who worked at the National Gallery. Did you see that? I asked Margaret. Did I see what? I headed for the kitchen and pressed the door just enough to look inside. Florian, where are you going? Asked Margaret, a hint of desperation in her voice. Just want to take a peek, I said, pushing it more. They were pretty specific about where we could and couldn't go, she reminded me. The key detail was that closed doors were a no-go. I pushed the door all the way open and said, but this door isn't closed anymore. Why are boys always this way? She said, shaking her head. I didn't stay to answer. I looked inside the kitchen, and when I saw that no one was in there, I went all the way in. The only way I was going to get a decent look was to go into the next room. And now he's totally gone off the deep end, I heard Margaret say as the door swung shut behind me. I don't know what came over me, but I wasn't scared in the least. I was determined to find him. I strode right across the kitchen and entered a pantry, where 2 security guards were taking a cigarette break. What's this? Demanded one of the guards. I stammered for a moment and failed miserably as I tried to use the Romanian phrase for where's the bathroom. I can't be certain, but I'm pretty sure I asked for the hovercraft. Speak in English, said the other guard. Oh, great, you speak English, I replied, my brain a total blank as to what to say. That means I can speak in English to you. I was still stammering away when a voice called out from behind. Johann, what are you doing? Agent Rivers had come to my rescue. He was dressed kind of nerdy in a plaid shirt with a name tag that read Mr. Mike Evans, North Bethesda Middle School. And when he talked, his voice had an excitable quality to it. I'm so sorry, he said to the guards. My name's Mike Evans. I'm the art teacher at North Bethesda Middle. Go Firebirds! Anyway, I brought 2 of my best students here to fully immerse themselves in the culture of another country. Unfortunately, Johann here has a tendency to wander off where he shouldn't. What have I told you about that, Johann? Not to do it, I said, still totally confused as to how he got here, but so grateful that he did. Anyway, I was led to believe that there would be a display of traditional Romanian painted eggs that we could look at. As an artist, I feel they truly capture the spirit and heritage of your country. I'd really like to show my students those eggs because next month we're going to be painting similar ones in class. And I think yours would give them an excellent target, creatively speaking. They are just exquisite. By the time he stopped talking long enough to take a breath, the guards had practically forgotten about me and were just looking to get back to their cigarettes. So can you tell me where they are? Rivers asked. Where what are? One guard asked, confused. The eggs. The painted Romanian eggs. I'd like to show them to the students. Fine, he replied. The eggs are in the library. But no more wandering, okay? All eyes turned to me. I promise, I said. We left the kitchen and beeline for the front door. How'd you know I was here? I asked under my breath. We'd gotten clear of the guards. Johann Blankford sent a message to ASCA agent wanting to know, where is the embassy of Romania? An odd question for an FBI agent, but certainly one that caught my attention. But I didn't send in any question, I said, even more confused. That was me, said Margaret, when I went to get my sneakers. You went behind my back? No, she saved your butt, Rivers corrected, although it may be short-lived because there's a decent chance I'm going to kill you when we get out of here. We made it to the entryway and were almost to the grand staircase when I saw Nicolae Nevrescu talking to a young woman in a blue dress. He seemed to be flirting with her, right up until the point he looked our way. We may have a problem. When I saw Nevrescu signal a humongous bodyguard to come over to him, I corrected that statement. Oh, yeah, we definitely have a problem.